Long before the gods walked Olympus, before mortals lit fires or sang their first songs, there was only silence. Not the silence of sleep or peace, but the stillness before time itself began, an endless, dark ocean without shape or edge. The ancient Greeks called it chaos, though it was not chaos in the way we imagine it, not wild or violent, but vast, slow, and unknowable. From that endless stillness came a gentle stirring, like the first ripple across water. Something unseen began to move, and from that movement, creation took its first quiet breath. Out of the void emerged Nyx, the goddess of night, her form wrapped in the deepest black. She drifted through the darkness, graceful and solemn, carrying with her the hush of mystery. From her shadow came Erebus, the spirit of darkness itself, who cloaked the empty universe in his soft, endless embrace. Together, they brought calm where there had been nothing, not light, not sound, just the quiet rhythm of existence itself. Then, slowly, from their union came Ether, the bright upper air, and Hemera, the goddess of day. When Hemera first opened her eyes, the universe shimmered with color. The fog of chaos lifted, and the first dawn broke, gentle and golden, spreading across an empty sky. It was not yet the world as we know it, but something in the void began to awaken. The Greeks said that from this moment, light and darkness began their eternal dance, one retreating as the other arrived, never destroying, always following, beneath this newborn sky. The first earth took shape. She was called Gaia, the Great Mother, the living ground upon which all would stand. She rose from the deep like a slow tide, her skin made of fertile soil and stone. Where she breathed, flowers appeared. Where she stepped, mountains rose. She was not made, she simply was. Alone she felt both peace and longing. For though she was vast and beautiful, she desired companionship, a being to share her rhythm, to echo her pulse. And so from her own body, she gave birth to Uranus, the sky, a being of light and boundless air. When Uranus looked upon Gaia, he loved her instantly, and he spread himself across her, embracing her completely. Together, they brought forth the first children, the Titans, mighty and immortal, each embodying a piece of creation. Among them was Oceanus, who became the endless river encircling the world, and Hyperion, the Titan of light, who fathered the sun and dawn. But Gaia and Uranus also birthed beings of power and terror, the with one burning eye of lightning, and the Hecaton, with 100 arms and 50 heads. Uranus feared these children, for they were strange and strong, and he cast them deep into the belly of the earth, locking them in darkness. Gaia, heartbroken, wept beneath the weight of her hidden children. Her sorrow grew into anger, and from that sorrow came her plan for rebellion. She whispered to her son Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, a child of cunning and strength. "Take this sickle," she said, forming the blade from the hardest flint, "and free your brothers from the darkness. End your father's tyranny." Cronus, bold and unflinching, waited for nightfall. When Uranus descended to lay upon Gaia, Cronus struck the sound sharp and final. From the wound of the sky, stars spilled out, scattering across the heavens. Thus, the night was forever marked with light. From Uranus's blood that fell upon the earth came strange and beautiful beings, the Erinyes, the Furies, the spirits of vengeance, and from the foam that touched the sea, Aphrodite, goddess of love, was born. The Greeks believed that from violence came beauty, from endings came beginnings, a truth woven into every story that followed. With Uranus gone, Cronus became ruler of the cosmos. The Titans built their kingdom, and time began to move forward, slow and golden, peaceful for a while. But Gaia's prophecy lingered, that just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too would he be overthrown by his own child. Fearful, Cronus swallowed each of his newborn children as soon as they were born: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, devouring them whole. Only one escaped, Zeus, hidden by his mother Rhea on the island of Crete. Rhea tricked Cronus by wrapping a stone in swaddling clothes, which he swallowed without question. Meanwhile, Zeus grew strong in secret, nourished by the milk of the divine goat Amalthea, and guarded by nymphs whose songs drowned out his cries. When he came of age, Zeus returned, cunning as his grandmother Gaia, and bold as his father. He gave Cronus a potion that made him vomit up his swallowed children. And the gods, now free, rose against the Titans in a war that shook the heavens. The battle lasted 10 years, a storm of thunder and stone, until Zeus freed the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires from their prison. Grateful, they forged for him a weapon unlike any other, the thunderbolt, a spark of pure sky. With this, Zeus struck down Cronus and the Titans, casting them into the dark pit of Tartarus, where even the light of the sun could not reach. And so the age of the Titans ended, and the age of the Olympians began. Zeus took his place upon Mount Olympus, his throne of cloud crowned with lightning. Beside him stood his brothers, Poseidon, who ruled the sea, and Hades, who ruled the underworld. The world was divided among them, balanced at last between sky, sea, and earth. When the first storm rolled across the sky, the Greeks said it was Zeus, reminding the world of his power. When the earth trembled, they said it was Poseidon stirring beneath the waves. And when the night grew quiet and the air seemed still, they said Hades was walking among the shades, counting the souls of men. But in the stillness of dawn, when the sun rose golden over the Aegean, it was neither power nor fear, the Greeks remembered. It was beauty. For every story, every god and goddess was born from the same longing that lived in Gaia herself, the desire to create, to love, to endure. The myths were not just tales of divine battles and fate. They were reflections of the human heart, whispered softly across generations, like lullabies for the soul. As the first light touched Olympus and the sea turned to gold, the gods looked down upon their creation, and for the first time the world truly began. When the great war between the Titans and the young Olympians finally ended, silence spread across the cosmos. The once roaring mountains and thunderous skies now stood still, blanketed by peace. The Titans, bound in the endless shadows of Tartarus, groaned beneath their defeat. The chains that held them were forged from the bones of the world itself, unbreakable, cold, and eternal. But above, upon the radiant peaks of Mount Olympus, a new world began to breathe. Zeus, now ruler of gods and men, looked out upon a creation that shimmered like dawn over calm waters. His brothers stood beside him, Poseidon, lord of the seas, his trident glowing with deep sapphire light, and Hades, silent and solemn, whose gaze carried the weight of every soul yet to be born. Together they divided the realms. Zeus took the heavens, the realm of storm and sky, the place where thunder ruled and lightning danced like living flame. Poseidon claimed the oceans, where creatures of unimaginable shape moved through endless blue. And Hades accepted the underworld, not as punishment, but as duty, a realm of quiet order where the souls of mortals would find rest or reckoning from this divine balance. The first golden age of the world began. The reign of peace, the air was soft, the earth fertile, and the seas calm. There were no wars, no hunger, no fear. The mortals who walked the earth lived as if in dream, their lives long, their days filled with ease. They knew no sickness, no pain. The earth, Gaia, now at peace, provided for them endlessly. Trees bore fruit year-round, rivers flowed with sweet water, and the sun never burned too hot. The gods looked down upon mankind as parents over their children. They guided them not through punishment or fear, but through quiet influence, the whisper of wind, the gleam of moonlight, the laughter of rain. The people built no temples, for they needed none. The entire world was sacred. It was an age when time itself moved gently, like a river in spring. But peace, the Greeks believed, is a fragile thing, a flower too delicate to survive forever. For even among the gods, ambition stirs. The rise of the Titan, Prometheus, while the Olympians ruled above. There were still Titans who roamed the edges of the world. Those who had not joined Cronus in rebellion and were spared the pit of Tartarus. Among them was Prometheus, whose name means forethought. Unlike his brother Atlas, who bore the weight of the heavens upon his shoulders, Prometheus carried a different burden, compassion for humankind. Prometheus had shaped mortals from clay and dew, molding them in the image of the gods. He watched them stumble through their days, fragile and shivering beneath the cold stars, and his heart ached for them. They had no fire to warm them, no knowledge to defend themselves, and no understanding of the divine order. One twilight, as Zeus dined upon Olympus, Prometheus approached him. "Great Zeus," he said, his voice calm but bold, "the mortals suffer in darkness. Grant them fire, that they might cook their food, forge their tools, and light their homes." Zeus looked down upon the Titan, his eyes like distant storms. "Fire is for the gods," he thundered. "It is the spark of creation, the power of the heavens. Give it to mortals, and they will forget their place." Prometheus bowed, but inside, he had already made his decision. That night, as the stars burned cold and high, Prometheus crept into Olympus. He climbed the slopes of the sacred mountain, where the eternal forge of Hephaestus glowed with golden flame. There, he lit a hollow reed, trapping within it a spark of divine fire. He carried it down to the mortal world, shielding it with his hands as the wind howled around him. When he placed the flame upon the earth, mankind awoke to wonder. They built fires that banished the night, cooked their meals, and forged tools from bronze and iron. They sang songs in the flickering light, and for the first time they began to dream, not but of greatness. From the clouds, Zeus saw the glow of fire spreading across the earth, and his fury darkened the heavens. "He has betrayed Olympus," Zeus roared. "For this theft he shall suffer eternally." The punishment of Prometheus ordered his servants, Kratos' power and Baia force, to seize Prometheus. They bound him with chains of adamantine to a lonely cliff upon Mount Caucasus, where the wind howled like a beast. There, each day, an eagle, the sacred bird of Zeus, would descend and feast upon Prometheus's liver. Each night it would grow back, and each dawn the torment would begin again. Yet Prometheus did not cry out. His defiance burned brighter than the fire he had given to men for centuries. He endured, his body broken, but his will unshaken. Mortals, meanwhile, flourished with the gift he had given them. They built cities, learned craft and language, and began to tell stories, stories of gods and heroes, of love and vengeance, of hope and despair. In every flicker of their fires, Prometheus lived on. Zeus, however, was not finished. He decided to punish mankind for their boldness. He called for Hephaestus, the divine smith, and Athena, goddess of wisdom, to create a new being, one both beautiful and dangerous. From clay, Hephaestus molded a woman of perfect grace. Athena breathed life into her, and Aphrodite gave her beauty. Hermes, sly and cunning, gave her the gift of curiosity and deceit. She was called Pandora, meaning all-gifted. When she was complete, Zeus handed her a sealed jar and said, "This must never be opened." Then he sent her to the world of men, as a gift or a trap at first. The mortals welcomed her. Her presence brought joy and wonder, but the jar whispered to her in the night, tempting her with questions. What secrets could it hold? Why would the gods forbid her to open it? Finally, unable to resist, Pandora lifted the lid. From the jar poured a storm of darkness, sickness, sorrow, jealousy, pain, greed, and death. All the afflictions that would plague humanity forever. Horrified, she slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. Only one thing remained inside. Hope. Thus began the end of the Golden Age. The fading of the golden light. The mortals who once lived without fear now faced death and despair. The seasons turned harsh. Winter bit with frost. Summer scorched with heat. The gods, watching from Olympus, became distant and divided. Where once they guided gently, now they demanded worship, sacrifice, and obedience. Temples rose, prayers echoed, and the age of innocence faded into legend. Yet not all was lost. Hope, the last spark in Pandora's jar, glowed softly in the hearts of men. The Greeks believed that this single gift, small, fragile, but unyielding, was what made mortals endure. And far away, upon the cliff of Caucasus, Prometheus smiled through his pain, for he knew that as long as humans remembered fire, and as long as hope remained, the gods could never truly rule them completely. The Golden Age had ended, but the story of mankind had only just begun. When the first dawn after Pandora's fateful choice broke across the world, it did not rise in gold, but in gray. The once perfect sunlight of the Golden Age now carried a pale, mournful tint. The birds that sang on the branches no longer sounded like laughter. Their songs were tinged with weariness. The rivers that once ran clear as glass now carried the faint scent of decay. The era of innocence had ended, and the mortals who had once lived as carefree children of the earth now looked upon their hands and saw the lines of labor. Pandora sat by the shattered jar, her heart heavy. Around her lay the remnants of divine gifts, joy, love, peace, all tainted by the shadows that had escaped. The air was filled with whispers, the soft cries of mortals learning what sorrow meant for the first time. And though she tried to close the jar, the world would never be the same. Only one thing remained inside, a faint glow, fragile but steady. Elpis, the spirit of hope, lingered there, her voice soft as a sigh. She whispered comfort to Pandora, who wept as she realized the truth. Even in suffering, humanity would never be entirely lost. The aftermath of the gift Zeus watched from Olympus as the mortal world changed beneath him. At first, his heart swelled with satisfaction. Order had been restored. Mortals would now remember who ruled the heavens. Yet, as the days passed, even Zeus felt an unease in the stillness of his throne room. The humans, though broken and fragile, did not bow completely. They prayed, yes, they built temples and offered sacrifices, but they also endured. They learned to till the earth, to harvest crops, to build homes against the cold. They sang songs even as they mourned. They looked to the stars and whispered questions that even the gods themselves could not answer. Zeus began to see what Prometheus had seen long ago, that within the frail hearts of mortals burned a strange, eternal strength. And though Zeus had punished the Titan, the spark he had stolen still lived, multiplying across every firelit village below. This troubled the king of the gods deeply. For where there is endurance, there is defiance. And where there is defiance, there is rebellion. The whisper of the Titans far beneath the earth. In the endless dark of Tartarus, the chained Titans stirred. The rumble of thunder, the cries of mortals, the shifting of the world, all reached them faintly, like echoes through a dream. The One's golden ruler sat upon a throne of stone, his chains glowing faintly with divine light. Around him were the others, Oceanus, Iapetus, Cous, Crius, their forms vast, their eyes filled with the slow fire of vengeance. Cronus spoke into the darkness. Do you hear it, my brothers? The world has changed. The mortals suffer. The gods above grow restless. From the shadows, a voice answered, deep, gravelly, ancient. They built their kingdom upon our fall, said Hyperion, lord of the dawn light, his eyes dimmed. And yet even now, cracks form in Olympus. The mortals no longer look to them in fear. Cronus smiled, slow and cold. Then perhaps, even from these depths, we may still shape the world. And so began the second whisper of rebellion, not of war, but of corruption. Of whispers carried on mortal dreams, the Titans began to reach out through the fabric of the world, sending shadows into the hearts of men and gods alike. Zeus felt it as a heaviness in his chest, Poseidon as restlessness in the tides, and Hades as murmurs in his kingdom of shades. The balance of Olympus trembled once more. The gods in Aesopon, the high halls of Olympus, the gods gathered. The golden columns shone with morning light, but their faces were grave. Athena stood at Zeus's side, wisdom gleaming in her calm eyes. Apollo strummed a lyre softly, his song meant to soothe the tension that filled the air. Ares leaned against his spear, restless and impatient. Hera, queen of the heavens, folded her hands and watched her husband's stormy expression. The mortals falter, she said quietly. They no longer see us as eternal. They blame the gods for their suffering. Zeus turned to her, his eyes flashing. They must learn to endure. It is not the duty of the heavens to coddle them. Athena stepped forward. And yet, Father, it was not their will that Pandora opened the jar. You may command thunder and flame, but not the hearts of mortals. That realm belongs to fate, and perhaps to hope. Her words fell softly, but they cut deep. Zeus turned away, staring at the clouds below. He knew she was right. He also knew that the Titans would never stop scheming, and that the weakness of mankind could one day become a weapon against Olympus itself to strengthen their rule. Zeus made a decree. Temples would be built, rituals performed, offerings burned. Mortals would be bound to the gods through worship, through fear, and through dependence. The age of divine harmony was over. The age of religion had begun. Echoes of Prometheus, meanwhile. Upon the far edges of the world, Prometheus still hung upon his rock. The eagle came every morning, tearing at his immortal flesh, and every night the wound closed once again. The stars wheeled above him endlessly, and though agony was his daily companion, he did not waver. Sometimes, when the winds blew softly, he heard the laughter of mortals below. The sound gave him strength. They had learned to use his fire to craft weapons, to cook food, to forge plows. They built homes, boats, and temples, not only for gods, but for themselves. They had learned to create, and that, he thought, was the greatest defiance of all. He whispered to the night, his voice trembling with pain but filled with pride. They will not forget. Even if my name fades, the fire will live on. In time, even Zeus began to soften. For though he had punished the Titan harshly, the world itself had changed in ways even he could not undo. Mankind had become more than just playthings of the gods. They had become reflections of them, flawed, passionate, creative. It was then that Zeus, in a rare moment of mercy, decreed that Prometheus's torment would end when a mortal of divine courage offered to take his place. Centuries passed, and one day a hero would indeed climb the mountain, Heracles, son of Zeus himself. But that is a story for another chapter. The fading of the old gods, the mortals, now aware of pain, death, and desire, began to dream of more than survival. They dreamed of meaning. The stories they told grew darker, more complex. No longer were the gods perfect. They were proud, jealous, and flawed mirrors of the humans who worshipped them. The poets began to whisper that perhaps it was not the gods who created men, but men who gave the gods their shape. And though such thoughts were dangerous, they spread like fire in the temples. Priests prayed louder. On Olympus, the gods sat in uneasy silence. Below, the Titans stirred once more in their chains, and the winds of a new age began to rise. An age not of gold, but of bronze and iron, of heroes and wars, of glory and ruin. The world of gentle perfection was gone forever. Yet from its ashes rose something greater, a world alive with struggle, story, and the endless reach of hope. They say that the stars themselves remember the name of Heracles, for his story was not one of peace, but of struggle, of pain, and of endurance that stretched beyond mortal limits. Long before his name echoed across the temples of Greece, before poets sang of his strength, he was just a man burdened by the weight of a destiny he never chose. His tale begins quietly, beneath a sky of gold and fire, when the gods still watched mankind closely, whispering in their dreams and shaping their fates from afar. Heracles was born to Alcmene, a mortal queen of Thebes, but his father was none other than Zeus, the king of the gods. It was said that Zeus, taking the form of Alcmene's husband, visited her under cover of night, and from that union came a child who carried both mortal blood and divine fire. Hera, wife of Zeus, knew of her husband's betrayal, and from the moment Heracles drew his first breath, her heart filled with vengeance. She could not harm Zeus directly, but she could make the life of his mortal son a long punishment as a baby. Heracles lay asleep in his cradle when Hera sent two great serpents to kill him. Their scales glistened under moonlight, their eyes burning with venomous hate. Yet, when they coiled toward him, the child awoke, reached out with small hands, and strangled both serpents effortlessly. The palace guards found him laughing among the corpses of the snakes. Even then, it was clear that this child was no ordinary mortal. Years passed, and Heracles grew into a man of enormous strength. His shoulders broad as mountain ridges, his voice deep and calm. But strength alone cannot shield one from destiny, and the gods had written a path for him that would test not only his body, but his soul. Hera waited patiently, weaving threads of misfortune through his life. She sent madness upon him, a blinding storm that turned his love into tragedy. In his frenzy, Heracles struck down his own wife and children, his mind clouded by divine cruelty. When the fog of madness lifted, he fell to his knees, crushed by the weight of what he had done. No blade or fire could match the torment within him. Seeking redemption, he went to the Oracle of Delphi, her voice echoing with the calm of eternity. She told him that the only path to forgiveness was through service. He must perform 12 impossible labors, each a test of his will and his humanity. Thus began the great journey of Heracles, the man fated to endure what no mortal could. The first of these labors took him to the hills of Nemea, where a monstrous lion terrorized the land. Its golden hide could not be pierced by weapon or arrow, and its roar shook the forests. Heracles tracked it for days, following trails of broken trees and bones. When he finally found it, the beast leaped with fury, its eyes burning with wild hunger. His arrows shattered upon its hide, his sword bent like a reed. So Heracles dropped his weapons and met the lion with his bare hands. They wrestled across the earth, man and beast locked in struggle beneath the fading light. At last, he seized the lion by the throat and crushed it until its breath stilled. When it was done, he took its hide and wore it as armor, a symbol of both triumph and penance. Word of his deed spread across Greece, but Hera was not finished. She whispered to Eurystheus, the cowardly king who oversaw Heracles' punishment, filling him with jealousy and fear. Each new labor he assigned was crueler than the last, each meant to break Heracles' spirit. But the son of Zeus endured. His second labor took him to the swamps of Lerna, where the Hydra dwelled, a serpent with 9 heads, each that grew back twofold when severed. Heracles waded into the black water, his club heavy in his hand. Every swing brought more heads, more fury, so he changed his tactic. He called upon his nephew Iolaus, who brought a burning torch. Together, they seared each neck as it was cut, preventing the creature from regenerating. When the final head fell, Heracles buried it deep beneath a stone, for even dead, its venom was deadly. His reward was not praise, but silence. Hera would not let his victories bring him peace in the quiet that followed. Heracles found himself walking long roads between his labors, his heart heavy with the knowledge that no feat would ever erase his past. Yet, in his loneliness, he began to understand the meaning of his suffering. Each monster he fought was not only a trial of strength, but a reflection of his own nature, the rage, the guilt, the chaos within. In the stillness between battles, he learned patience, humility, and endurance. Though Hera's hate burned eternally, Heracles' resolve grew stronger with every wound he healed and every scar he carried. Years went by, and the world began to change around him. The mortals saw him not as cursed, but as divine, a being who bore pain in their stead, a hero who fought against the darkness they could not face. Temples rose in his honor, songs were sung of his courage, and his name became a beacon of hope. But Heracles himself sought no glory. He walked barefoot through the dust, his lion's hide his only cloak, his club his only companion. He became a symbol not of triumph, but of endurance, the lesson that even the strongest must bow before fate, yet rise again with purpose. There came a time when Heracles' labors were nearly done. The 12th and final challenge awaited him to descend into the underworld and bring back Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades. It was a task no mortal had ever survived, but Heracles no longer feared death. He walked through the gates of the dead, his presence shaking the realm of shadows. Hades watched him with quiet respect and said, "You may take my hound if you can subdue him, but use no weapon." Heracles faced the beast with his bare hands once more, as he had faced the lion years before. The hound's 3 heads roared with fury, their breath hot as fire, their chains rattling with the sound of judgment. The struggle seemed endless, but Heracles did not yield. Slowly, with sheer will, he brought the creature to heel. And when he returned to the surface, leading Cerberus into the light, the world knew that even the gates of death could not hold him when his labors were done. Heracles was free, yet his life still carried the shadow of Hera's wrath. In time, his mortal body would fail, but his spirit, forged in pain and redemption, could not be bound to earth. Upon his death, Zeus himself lifted him to Olympus, granting him immortality. There, among the gods, Heracles found peace at last, not as a warrior, but as one who had endured, learned, and risen above his suffering. The people of Greece would forever remember his name, not for his strength alone, but for his humanity, for even a God-born man must fall before he can rise. And so, as the stars drifted across the sky, the Greeks would whisper his story to the winds. They said that when thunder rolled softly over the hills, it was Heracles walking the heavens, carrying the echoes of his mortal journey within him. His tale was not one of victory, but of balance, of light born from pain, of redemption shaped through struggle. It was a story that lulled even the restless heart of night into stillness, a reminder that no curse lasts forever, and even divine wrath can give way to peace. They say the world once grew silent when Orpheus played his lyre. Even the stones, it was told, would shift and listen, and the trees leaned closer to hear his song. He was not born among gods or kings, but among poets and dreamers. And from his earliest breath, music clung to him like a divine shadow. His mother was Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, whose voice had inspired heroes and shaped myths. His father, some said, was the god Apollo himself, the lord of music and light. From that union came a child who seemed half mortal, half melody. When Orpheus touched the strings of his lyre for the first time, the sound was like sunlight breaking through the forest after rain. The people of Thrace would stop their work just to listen. The winds softened when he played, the rivers slowed their current, and even the birds grew quiet, their songs humble beside his. Yet, despite such beauty, Orpheus was gentle and humble, a man who sought neither praise nor power. His music was not for the world, but for the one he loved, Eurydice, a maiden whose laughter carried like soft rain through summer fields. She was as quiet as he was tender, her presence like the whisper of spring. They met one evening when he played beneath the silver moon, and her voice joined his in harmony, so perfect that even the stars seemed to pause. From that night on, they were inseparable, to souls bound not by fate, but by song. Their love was simple, yet in the world of gods, even simple love cannot last untouched. On the day of their wedding, when the torches still burned and the guests still danced, Eurydice walked through the tall grass to gather flowers. In her joy, she did not see the serpent coiled beneath her feet. Its bite came swiftly, and within moments, her laughter turned to silence. When Orpheus found her, she was still and pale, her body light as air in his arms. The music that had filled his heart shattered into quiet despair. The sun dimmed, and for the first time, the strings of his lyre refused to sing. Days turned into nights, and nights into endless mourning. The flowers around his home withered as he sat among them, his fingers brushing the strings without sound. The people whispered that he had gone mad, that no man could grieve so deeply and remain whole. But Orpheus's silence was not madness. It was resolve. One evening, as twilight settled, he stood, lifted his lyre, and spoke softly into the wind. "If she walks where the dead dwell," he said, "then I will go where the living may not." And so began his descent into the underworld. The journey was long, filled with shadows that clung to his steps. The air grew cold and heavy, and the rivers no longer sang, but murmured in sorrow. He reached the banks of the Styx, the river that divides life and death. There, the ferryman Charon stood, his eyes hollow beneath a hood of black. "No mortal crosses," Charon said, his voice like the grinding of stone. But Orpheus did not argue. He lifted his lyre, and from the strings poured a song so full of grief and love that even the waters of the Styx stilled. The ferryman's bony hands trembled as he lowered his oar and gestured for him to board. Through endless gloom they sailed, past the whispering souls of the dead. The wails that once filled this realm quieted as Orpheus played. Even Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guarded the gates, laid down its monstrous heads, whimpering softly as the mortal passed. The underworld itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with the melody, as if all that had ever died longed to live again through his song at last. Orpheus came before Hades and Persephone, the rulers of the dead. Hades, dark and unyielding, watched the mortal approach, while Persephone's eyes, bright as moonlit frost, softened with curiosity. Without words, Orpheus began to play. The notes rose like a fragile prayer, weaving through the halls of the dead. He sang of love lost too soon, of laughter turned to echo, of a world that could not fill the void left behind by one gentle soul. The shades that lingered in the shadows began to weep, and even the cold heart of Hades felt the echo of a time when he had known tenderness. When the final note faded, Orpheus knelt, his voice trembling as he spoke. I do not seek to defy your laws, O King of Shadows. I only ask for mercy. Let her return to the light. Let me bear her sorrow in her stead. Hades sat in silence, his gaze unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, he spoke. You may take her, Orpheus, but there is one condition. As you lead her back to the world above, she will follow you in silence. You must not look back until both of you stand beneath the sun. If you turn before then, she will be lost forever. Orpheus bowed, his heart filled with both hope and dread. Persephone smiled faintly, her voice soft as falling snow. Go, and let your love guide you more than your fear. The path upward was steep and silent. The air grew warmer, the shadows thinner. Behind him, Orpheus could hear the soft steps of Eurydice. Each one was like the heartbeat of a dream, fragile and distant. He dared not look back, though every instinct screamed to see her face once more. The closer he came to the surface, the stronger his doubt became. What if Hades had deceived him? What if she was not there at all, and only silence followed him through the dark? His hands trembled on the lyre, and the music faltered. At last, a single ray of sunlight touched the path ahead. His heart leaped, freedom was near. But in that instant of joy, fear overtook him. He turned. Eurydice was there, her form glowing faintly in the half-light, her eyes filled with love and sorrow. She reached out to him, but already her body was fading, her hand dissolving like mist. Farewell, my love, she whispered, her voice fading with the last echo of his song. You have brought me farther than I ever dreamed. Remember me in your music. And then she was gone. Orpheus stood in silence, staring at the empty path. The sun rose fully, but it brought him no warmth. He walked the earth again, but the world no longer sang to him. The trees no longer swayed to his rhythm, and the birds no longer answered his call. He wandered the lands of Greece, playing only for ghosts and the wind. His song was still beautiful, but it carried a sorrow so deep that even the gods wept when they heard it in time. His story ended as quietly as it began. Some say he was torn apart by wild women who could not bear the weight of his grief-filled melodies. Others say that Apollo took pity on him and lifted his spirit to the heavens, where he and Eurydice could finally be together, their music becoming the constellation of the lyre, the stars themselves a reminder of the love that defied even death. And so, the Greeks would say that when the night is calm and the wind moves softly through the trees, if you listen carefully, you can still hear Orpheus's song, gentle, eternal, weaving through the stars, carrying the memory of a love that never truly died. In the stillness before dawn, when the sea whispered against the rocks and the gulls were nothing more than faint silhouettes against a pale horizon, an old craftsman sat in silence. His name was Daedalus, a man whose mind could shape miracles from dust. He had built labyrinths that confused the sun itself and machines that made men believe they could touch the sky. Yet, for all his genius, he was a prisoner trapped on the island of Crete under the rule of King Minos. His only companion was his son, Icarus, a boy whose laughter echoed brighter than the sea winds that swept their cell. Daedalus had been a creator all his life, but never had he dreamed of creation as salvation. As the days stretched into years, he would sit beside the narrow window, studying the gulls that glided effortlessly across the waves. The gods gave wings to birds, he once murmured, but perhaps they only wait for men to build their own. Icarus would laugh at his father's strange words, not knowing that behind them was the spark of a dangerous dream. Night after night, Daedalus collected feathers, long, white, and curved from the gulls that rested upon the cliffs. He gathered wax from the candles that burned in their chamber, melting and shaping it with trembling hands. Slowly, carefully, he bound the feathers together with thread and patience, until two great pairs of wings lay before them, one for him, one for his son. "These will carry us home," he whispered. Icarus looked upon them with wide eyes, as though the sun itself had fallen into their small, dim cell. When the day came to flee, the sky was clear and boundless. Daedalus fastened the wings upon his son's shoulders, his fingers steady but his heart trembling. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice filled with the weight of both love and fear. "Fly between the sea and the sun. Too low, and the waves will drown you. Too high, and the heat will melt your wings. Follow me, and do not forget yourself in the wind." Icarus nodded, his young heart swelling with excitement. He did not see the danger. He only saw freedom, the endless horizon waiting to embrace him. Together they climbed to the highest cliff, where the sea roared below. Daedalus spread his wings, and the wind caught him like a forgotten promise. For the first time, he rose, lifted by his own invention. Behind him, Icarus followed, his laughter ringing out as he soared. The island of Crete grew smaller beneath them, its towers shrinking into specks of stone and shadow. The fishermen on the shore looked up and crossed themselves, thinking they had seen two gods ascending from the sea. The wind sang through their feathers, the air cool and alive. For Daedalus, every beat of the wing was a prayer, a plea for safety, for home, for the chance to live again without chains. But for Icarus, it was ecstasy. The wind pressed against his skin, the clouds brushed his cheeks, and the sky opened like a dream. He forgot his father's warnings. The voice that had guided him since childhood was now a distant whisper beneath the rush of his heartbeat. The higher he flew, the brighter the world became. Below him, the sea glittered like glass, and above him, the sun burned golden and kind. He spread his arms wider. "Father," he cried, though Daedalus could barely hear him through the roar of the wind. "Look, I am not afraid." Daedalus turned, his eyes wide with dread. "Icarus, no," he shouted, his voice snatched away by the sky. But the boy was already climbing higher, his wings trembling in the heat. The wax began to soften, the feathers loosening one by one. He didn't notice at first. He only felt the warmth on his face, the light that wrapped around him like the arms of a god. Then came the first feather, fluttering away into the blue. Then another, and another. Panic struck him. He flapped harder, desperate to rise. But the more he struggled, the faster his wings fell apart. The wax dripped down his arms like tears of fire. He looked down. The sea was so far below, a living mirror waiting to claim him. "Father," he cried again, but this time the sound was lost, swallowed by the vastness of the air. Daedalus saw him fall. For a moment, it was as if time had stopped, the boy suspended between heaven and earth, his arms spread wide as though embracing both. Then he plunged, the wind screaming around him. The sea rose to meet him, and the sun, in its terrible beauty, shone on. When Daedalus descended, the ocean was calm again, save for a few feathers drifting on its surface. He searched until his hands were raw and his voice broken, calling his son's name into the waves. But Icarus was gone. The gods had taken him, or the sea had claimed him, or perhaps both. In grief, Daedalus built a small shrine upon a lonely shore. He placed the remaining feathers there and wept, not for the folly of his invention, but for the boundless hope of a child who had believed the sky would always hold him. "Fly between the sea and the sun," he whispered again, though there was no one left to hear. The world moved on. The island of Icaria was named where the boy had fallen, and the tale spread like wind across the Aegean. Sailors would whisper it to their sons, warning them of pride and the fragile nature of dreams. But in quiet moments, when the dawn breaks over the sea, one might imagine the faint glimmer of wings in the distance, a reminder of Icarus, who dared to touch the light. The Greeks did not tell this story as tragedy alone. For them, Icarus was not a fool, but a symbol of longing, of courage, of that unquenchable human desire to reach beyond what the gods allowed. His fall was not a failure, but a moment of beauty too great for the world to bear. Even the sea, they said, sang a softer song where he had fallen. And so, as sleep slowly gathers around your thoughts, imagine the horizon turning gold, the sky stretching infinite, and a boy with wings of light rising through the air, not falling, not fading, but forever ascending toward the warmth of the sun. In the heart of Greece, where the mountains cradle the sky and the wind moves like a spirit through the pines, there once stood a place that was said to breathe with the voice of the gods. It was called Delphi, a sanctuary resting upon the slopes of Mount Parnassus. Travelers from across the ancient world came there, not for gold or glory, but for something far more elusive: answers. For it was believed that within Delphi dwelled the will of Apollo, god of prophecy, music, and light. His voice, they said, flowed through a woman known as the Pythia, the oracle of Delphi. And when she spoke, even kings trembled, long before the marble columns rose, before the songs of pilgrims filled the valley. This mountain was wild. Legends say that in its earliest days, the land belonged not to gods, but to a serpent, Python, the guardian of the earth's secrets. It slept deep within the caverns, its coils wound around the heart of the mountain, exhaling mists that made mortals dream strange dreams. When Apollo came seeking a home for his shrine, he found the beast, ancient and wise, unwilling to yield. The battle that followed was said to shake the roots of the world. Lightning clashed against shadow, and the serpent's cry echoed through the stones. When the dust settled, Apollo stood victorious. But unlike other gods, Apollo did not claim the mountain through domination alone. He purified it with light and music, transforming the serpent's lair into a sanctuary where mortals might touch the divine. The breath of the serpent remained, curling in unseen wisps from the earth, not as poison, but as a bridge between the mortal mind and the realm of prophecy. It was from these vapors, they said, that the oracle drew her power. Centuries later, Delphi had become the beating heart of ancient Greece. The road to its temple wound upward through olive groves and marble statues, each step echoing with prayers and secrets. Pilgrims arrived from distant lands, soldiers, rulers, wanderers, and lovers, all carrying offerings for Apollo, all seeking a single moment of truth. Some brought gold, Others brought songs. But most brought silence, for in the presence of the divine, words often failed. At the center of the temple was the adyton, a small, sacred chamber where the oracle sat upon a tripod, her eyes half closed, her body swaying with the rhythm of the unseen. Beneath her feet, a crack in the stone exhaled warm vapors, the breath of Python, still alive within the earth. When she inhaled it, her mind drifted beyond the human world. Her voice, when it came, was strange, part whisper, part song, part echo. They said she did not speak her own words. Apollo himself moved through her, shaping her thoughts into riddles and prophecies. Those who listened left either enlightened or haunted, for the truth she gave was never simple. The oracle did not tell men what to do, she told them what they were. One such man was Croesus, the king of Lydia, rich beyond measure and proud beyond reason. He came to Delphi bearing treasures, golden bowls, jeweled crowns, and ivory statues, hoping to gain Apollo's favor before going to war against Persia. When he asked the oracle if he should attack, she answered with a voice that trembled like water, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." Croesus smiled. He heard what he wished to hear, and so he marched to war, only to see his own empire crumble. When word reached Delphi of his defeat, the oracle merely said he should have asked which empire. Such was the nature of prophecy, not deceit, but mirror. The oracle spoke truth, but mortals, blinded by desire, could not bear to see it clearly. But Delphi was not only a place of kings and wars. It was also a place of quiet seekers, shepherds, widows, poets, and travelers who came simply to ask why the heart yearned for what it could not have. The oracle never turned them away. Some left weeping, some laughing, and some silent, but all left changed. One poet, it was said, came to ask why he was born with a voice that sang of sorrow. The oracle listened, her face calm, her eyes distant. When she spoke, her words fell like dew upon dry earth, because joy untested is not joy at all. The poet left and wrote his greatest song, a hymn to both love and loss. As the centuries passed, Delphi grew vast and golden. Statues of heroes lined the sacred way, offerings filled the treasury, and philosophers debated the meaning of every word the oracle ever uttered. Yet, for all its grandeur, the temple remained a place of stillness. At dawn, when the sun's first light kissed the mountain, one could hear the faint hum of the earth beneath the marble floor, the same ancient breath that had once risen from the serpent's mouth. The oracle's power was not only in the words she spoke, but in the silence that followed. For in that silence, mortals were left alone with themselves, and in that stillness, they sometimes heard their own truth. There were times, though, when even the oracle faltered. In her final years, when the world was changing and the old gods were fading, she would sit for hours without speaking, her gaze lost in the horizon. Pilgrims would come and wait, and sometimes she would only whisper, "The light grows dim, but it will return in another form." And when at last the temple fell into ruin, and the voices of Apollo's priests faded into memory, the mountain did not forget. Even now, if you walk the slopes of Delphi at sunset, when the air turns gold and the wind hums low, you may feel it, that faint pulse beneath your feet, that whisper rising from the stones. Some say it is only the wind through the valley, but those who listen closely know better. It is the same voice that once spoke through the oracle, softer now, gentler but eternal. It speaks not in riddles anymore, but in calm reminders that wisdom often hides in silence, that truth is not always loud, and that the gods, though unseen, still breathe within the earth. And so, as you close your eyes and drift into quiet, imagine the marble steps of Delphi shining in the fading sun, the scent of laurel leaves in the air, and the whisper of Apollo's light moving through the valley, not to command, but to comfort. In a forgotten age, when the gods still walked among men, and the rivers carried songs instead of water, there lived a king whose name shimmered like sunlight upon the sea, Midas of Phrygia. His palace gleamed atop a hill of cypress trees, where every corridor echoed with the quiet footfalls of wealth. Jewels filled his tables, goblets of silver lined his halls, and golden statues watched with cold, patient eyes as their master walked among them. Yet, for all his riches, King Midas was not content. The hunger that lived within him was not for bread, nor wine, nor power. It was for more. From dawn till dusk, he would sit in his garden of roses, gazing at the petals that glowed crimson beneath the sun. If only, he murmured to himself, the world could match their beauty in gold. He saw gold not as metal, but as perfection, untarnished, eternal, untouched by decay. And so he prayed to the heavens for a gift that would make everything he touched turn to that divine hue. One evening, as twilight draped its silver cloth across the sky, a stranger wandered into the palace gardens. His robe was torn, his feet bare, but his eyes gleamed with a light older than the stars. The guards hesitated to stop him, for something in his presence made them bow their heads in silence. When Midas approached, the man smiled faintly. "You are a generous king," he said softly, "for you have given shelter to one whom the world has forgotten." Midas, though wary, was flattered. "And who might you be, traveler?" he asked. The man's smile deepened. "A servant of Dionysus, god of wine and joy. My name is Silenus. I wandered too far from my master's path, and your kindness has brought me rest." For 10 days, Midas entertained him, offering him feasts and music, wine and laughter. When at last Silenus departed, Dionysus himself appeared before the king in gratitude. "You have shown kindness to one dear to me," said the god, his voice like the murmur of distant rivers. "Ask any gift, and it shall be yours." The king bowed low, his eyes burning with longing. "Grant me," he said, "that everything I touch may turn to gold." For a moment, Dionysus said nothing. Then he sighed, the sound carrying the weight of centuries. "Mortal hearts rarely know the measure of their desire," he murmured. "But so be it. As you wish, Midas. Your hands shall carry the power of transformation. Use it well." When the god vanished, Midas's heart leaped. He reached for a nearby rose, and before his eyes, the soft petals hardened, their scarlet color fading into radiant gold. He laughed aloud, a sound that startled the birds from the trees. He touched the branches, the stones, the very air, all turned to shimmering gold beneath his fingers. He returned to his palace, unable to contain his joy. Every step he took left behind footprints of gold dust. Every door he opened gleamed brighter than the sun. He summoned his servants, showing them his divine gift. "Behold," he declared, "the favor of the gods." They bowed low, but fear flickered in their eyes, As the day wore on, Midas sat to dine, his hunger sharp from excitement. He lifted a grape to his lips and felt the crunch of metal. The fruit had turned to gold. He tried wine, but it flowed like molten amber, heavy and lifeless. Bread turned to metal before he could swallow. Panic began to stir within him. He called for his daughter, his only child, whose laughter had always been his true treasure. She ran to him, her small hands reaching for his. "Father, why do you weep?" she asked. "I have been blessed, my dear," he said, though his voice trembled. "Look, everything I touch becomes gold." But when she embraced him, her warmth vanished. In an instant, her soft skin hardened, her hair froze mid-motion, her eyes turned to gleaming metal. She stood before him, a golden statue, perfect, beautiful, lifeless. The hall grew still. The torches flickered, their light dancing across her unyielding face. Midas fell to his knees, his cry echoing through the palace like the toll of a bell. He reached for her again, but dared not touch. "Oh gods," he whispered, "take back your gift. Take back this curse." For 3 days and nights, Midas wandered through his golden halls, his footsteps hollow. The world he had once envied, the trees in his garden, gleamed but no longer rustled in the wind. The fountains froze mid-splash, their beauty now a mockery of life. He could neither eat nor sleep nor hold the one he loved. At last, broken and humbled, he returned to the riverbank and called out to Dionysus. "Merciful God," he cried, "I have learned my folly. Gold cannot warm the heart or feed the soul. Take away this power and give me back the world as it was." The god appeared again, his form shimmering like sunlight through wine. "You have come to understand what few men ever do," Dionysus said gently. "Go to the river Pactolus, wash your hands there, and the curse shall flow from you." Midas obeyed. He knelt in the river's current, the water cool and alive against his skin. As he washed, the gold melted from his fingers, swirling away into the stream until the water itself shimmered with its residue. When he arose, the trees no longer gleamed. The earth beneath his feet was soft and real once more. He returned home, his heart heavy but free. His daughter's statue stood where he had left it. With trembling hands, he touched her cheek and felt warmth return beneath his fingers. Her eyes opened, her voice soft as the wind, whispered, "Father." He held her close, tears of joy falling onto her hair. "Never again," he said. "Never again will I pray for gold." From that day onward, Midas renounced his wealth. He filled his palace not with treasures, but with music and laughter. Travelers who passed through Phrygia spoke of a king who once turned the world to gold, but chose instead to live among the living. The river Pactolus, it is said, still carries flecks of gold in its sands, a silent reminder of Midas's curse and redemption. And so, when the Greeks spoke of him, they did not only speak of greed, but of awakening, of the moment when a man learns that what glitters most is not always what endures. So as you close your eyes tonight, imagine the golden halls fading into quiet earth, the cold metal softening into the warmth of human touch. Let the river's song carry you away, gentle, forgiving, eternal. In the hush of the ancient forests, where time seemed to move with the rhythm of rustling leaves and whispering streams, there once lived a boy whose beauty was said to rival that of the gods. His name was Narcissus, a name that would echo through the ages, not for his deeds, but for the mirror he could never escape. Narcissus was born to the river god, Cephasus, and the nymph Liriope, whose tears shimmered like pearls beneath moonlight. From his earliest years, those who looked upon him were struck with awe. His hair caught the light like spun gold, his eyes held the calm of still waters, and his smile, rare though it was, could melt even the coldest heart. Yet beneath that beauty there lay a heart untouched by tenderness. For though all loved him, Narcissus loved none. As he grew, the nymphs of the forest, the maidens of the valley, even the spirits of the streams called out to him, but he turned them all away. He found their affection tiresome, their longing weak. He wandered alone, preferring the solitude of the woods to the warmth of companionship. "No heart," he said once, "is worthy of mine." Among those who adored him was Echo, a mountain nymph cursed by the goddess Hera. Once, Echo had been a bright and talkative spirit who filled the mountains with her songs. But after deceiving Hera with her chatter, she was doomed to repeat only the last words spoken to her. Her voice, stripped of freedom, became a shadow of sound, a mirror of others. When Echo first saw Narcissus wandering through the forest, bow in hand, she felt her breath falter. Every step he took seemed to stir the wind itself. She longed to speak to him, to tell him of her heart, but her curse silenced her. She could only follow him, hiding behind trees, repeating softly whatever words he spoke. "Is anyone here?" he called one day, his voice echoing against the stones. "Here," she whispered back. He said, "Curious." "To me," she repeated. Her voice floated through the trees like music. Narcissus turned, puzzled. "Why do you hide?" "Hide," came the gentle reply. Thinking it a game, he smiled. "Let us meet." "Meet," she breathed, stepping from behind the trees. For the first time, their eyes met. Echo rushed toward him, her arms open, joy trembling through her body. But Narcissus drew back sharply. "Away from me," he said coldly. "I would sooner love my own reflection than another." Her smile faltered, her arms fell. "Another," she whispered faintly, and her voice faded into the trees. Heartbroken, she fled, her laughter gone, her form withering like mist under morning light. Only her voice remained, drifting through mountains and valleys, a soft echo of sorrow. Narcissus, unmoved, continued his solitary wanderings. But the gods, who see all hearts, had grown weary of his arrogance. They decided he would learn what it meant to love and to lose. One afternoon, he came upon a crystal-clear pool deep within the woods. The water was so still, it seemed like a sheet of glass, unbroken even by the breeze. Thirsty from the hunt, Narcissus knelt beside it. As he leaned over the surface, he saw a face staring back, radiant, perfect, full of light. He froze. The eyes that met his were bright and tender, the lips slightly parted as though in wonder. "Who is this being?" he whispered. The reflection moved as he moved, smiled when he smiled, breathed when he breathed. A strange warmth stirred within him. "I have found my match," he murmured, "my equal, my love." Day after day, he returned to the pool. He could not eat, could not sleep, could not think of anything else but the beautiful being beneath the water. He spoke to it softly, reaching out, but every touch shattered the image into ripples. Each time, he waited for it to return, his heart breaking a little more. "Why do you flee?" he asked. Am I not worthy of your embrace? The reflection only trembled and vanished, leaving him grasping at air. Soon, the forest grew silent around him. The birds no longer sang, the rivers no longer laughed. Narcissus remained beside the pool, wasting away, his golden hair tangled, his eyes dim with exhaustion. Yet, even as his strength faded, his gaze did not waver. Farewell, he whispered one final evening, the twilight painting the world in violet and gold. For though I die in love. He bowed his head, and the ripples swallowed his reflection. The water stilled once more, its surface empty, but for the faint glimmer of a falling tear. When the nymphs returned the next day, they found no trace of him, only a flower blooming by the edge of the pool. Its white petals cupped a golden heart, and when the wind stirred, it bent gracefully to look at its reflection in the water. The nymphs named it Narcissus, after the boy who had loved too deeply and too foolishly, and Echo, hearing the soft rustle of the flower's petals, whispered his name again, a tender echo drifting through time. Narcissus. The gods looked upon this and were silent, for in his beauty and his folly, Narcissus had learned what it meant to see oneself too clearly and to lose the world in the mirror. So when night falls and you gaze into still waters, be gentle. The reflection you see is not only your own, it is the memory of every soul who ever loved an illusion, every heart that mistook the shimmer for the source. Let the forest grow quiet in your mind. Let the ripples fade into sleep. And somewhere in the stillness of your dreams, may Echo's voice carry you to rest. There was once a time when the world was still new, a place of gentle, quiet, and golden light. The rivers glided softly through meadows of silver grass. The winds hummed a lullaby through olive trees, and mankind, fragile and curious, lived without sorrow. There was no pain, no sickness, no hunger. The earth itself seemed to breathe with peace, but peace, like glass, can shatter at a whisper. And the gods, ever watchful, were not content to let men live untouched by their will. For it was said that after Prometheus, the clever Titan, had stolen fire from the heavens and gifted it to humanity, Zeus himself was filled with thunderous rage. Fire had been the gods' secret, their flame of knowledge and creation. In mortal hands, it burned with both promise and peril. Zeus saw the smoke rising from human villages, saw men building, forging, dreaming, and he feared they might forget who ruled them. So, in his infinite pride, he sought to balance the gift with a curse, and thus he conceived Pandora. She was not born as mortals are, but crafted with divine hands. Hephaestus, the god of the forge, molded her body from the finest clay, smooth and perfect, her form glimmering like polished ivory. Athena breathed life into her and taught her grace, draping her in robes woven from starlight and morning dew. Aphrodite touched her lips, giving her beauty that could stir even stone to longing. Hermes gifted her a cunning mind and a silvery tongue, teaching her how to charm and deceive with a smile. When she opened her eyes for the first time, the gods themselves drew closer. The heavens dimmed, for all light seemed to gather within her gaze. Yet, beneath that loveliness, beneath the music of her laughter, there lingered something unseen, a quiet, dangerous curiosity. Zeus looked upon his creation and named her Pandora, meaning all gifted. He smiled, but it was a smile edged with shadow. Into her hands he placed a jarsum, say it was a box, small and unremarkable, sealed with golden wax. "Guard this," he told her softly. "Do not open it, for within lies what should never be touched." He gave her no key, no reason, and as all who dream know, a mystery left unspoken is a fire left smoldering. Soon after, Hermes led Pandora down to the mortal world. She walked among the green valleys where Prometheus' brother, Epimetheus, dwelled. He was gentle, kind-hearted, and not nearly as wise as his name implied, for Epimetheus meant afterthought. Prometheus had warned him never to accept a gift from Zeus, knowing well the god's cunning. But when Epimetheus saw Pandora standing before him, her smile soft as dawn, his heart forgot all caution. He welcomed her into his home, offered her bread, fruit, and wine, and in time they were wed. For a while, the world remained golden. Pandora laughed among the fields, gathered flowers, and spoke kindly to every creature that crossed her path. Yet, each night, when the stars shimmered above their cottage, her eyes would stray to the jar sitting in the corner. It gleamed faintly in the firelight. Its seal was unbroken, but she could almost feel something moving inside, something alive, whispering to her. What harm, she thought, one evening could come from a glance? She would approach it quietly, running her fingers along the cool surface, tracing the symbols carved into its lid. Some nights she heard faint murmurs, like sighs carried through water. Other nights she felt warmth radiating from within, pulsing with her heartbeat. Curiosity, once stirred, does not rest. It grows twines around the mind, like ivy around an old stone wall. It whispers reason, then temptation. One dawn, when Epimetheus was away, gathering grain, Pandora could bear it no longer. The air was still, the sun pale behind drifting clouds. The jar sat in the center of the room, waiting, gleaming faintly, as though it knew her thoughts. Her breath trembled. "Just a little," she whispered, "just a moment." She broke the seal. The sound was soft, almost like a sigh. But what came next was not light, it was shadow. From the mouth of the jar burst a torrent of smoke, black and writhing. It filled the room, coiling through the air, spilling through the windows. Each cloud took shape shadows with eyes like embers and voices like broken wind. Pain flew out first, its touch sharp as ice. Then came sickness, its breath hot and foul. Hunger, grief, jealousy, rage, spirit, they slipped beneath doors, hid in hearts, and found homes in every corner of mortal life. Pandora cried out, slamming the lid shut, but it was too late. The jar grew cold in her hands, its surface dull and heavy. She sank to the floor, trembling, surrounded by silence. Then she heard a faint sound, almost like a heartbeat, still echoing from within the jar. Something remained. Gently, she opened it once more. A soft light rose, golden and trembling, a fragile winged figure that glowed like the last ember of a dying fire. It hovered before her, and where its light fell, the air grew calm again. "What are you?" she whispered. "I am Elpis," it said, hope. And with that, it drifted out of the window. Vanishing into the morning sky, Pandora sat there for a long time, the jar empty beside her, her eyes wet with tears. Around her, the world had changed. The laughter of men was thinner now, their joys tempered by fear. Yet in their eyes, a new fire burned hope, small but enduring, keeping them alive through pain and loss. When Epimetheus returned, he found her sitting in silence. She told him what she had done, her voice heavy with guilt. But he took her hands and said, "Do not weep, for without pain we would not cherish joy, and without hope we would not endure at all." In time, they grew old together. The world around them was no longer perfect, but it was real. And somewhere, far above Olympus, even Zeus watched and wondered if he had given too much or perhaps just enough. So remember this. As you close your eyes tonight, within every shadow lies the echo of that jar. And within every heart, a spark of that same hope. It flickers softly like a candle in the wind, reminding us that even the gods could not seal light away forever. Sleep now, child of the new world. The jar is closed, but its story still hums beneath your dreams. The sea stretched endlessly beneath the pale morning light, a smooth mirror of silver and blue. Waves sighed against the cliffs of Crete, carrying whispers from faraway lands. High above the water, in a lonely stone tower, an old man bent over his work. His hands were clever, his eyes weary, and his name was Daedalus, the greatest craftsman of his time. Once he had built wonders for kings and gods alike. It was he who carved statues that seemed to breathe, who built temples that caught the sun just so, who invented tools that could mimic the hands of creation itself. But brilliance has its price. In the court of King Minos, Daedalus had crafted the labyrinth, a maze so vast and winding that none who entered ever found their way out. At its heart, the monstrous Minotaur waited, half man, half bull. A secret the king could not bear the world to see. When Daedalus helped the hero Theseus slay the beast and escape, Minos' pride turned to fury. The king could not kill the great inventor that would have been too merciful. Instead, he locked Daedalus and his young son, Icarus, within the tower above the sea, sealing them with stone and guards. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. The sea was their only companion. Sometimes Daedalus would stand at the narrow window, staring at the horizon, his thoughts stretching farther than the waves. Icarus, restless and bright-eyed, would ask, "Father, will we ever leave this place?" Daedalus would smile faintly. "There is always a way, my son," he would say, "even when none seems to exist." For the mind that had built the labyrinth could not be caged by walls. Each day, he watched the gulls circle above the sea. He studied how they rose, how they tilted their wings, how the wind lifted them higher. Slowly, a plan began to form, a dream of escape that only the sky could hold. From feathers dropped by birds and wax taken from candles, Daedalus began his work. His fingers shaped the feathers into layers, small ones at the base, larger ones at the top, bound together with wax and thread. Icarus watched in wonder as the wings took shape. They gleamed in the sunlight, fragile yet magnificent, like something stolen from the gods. "Will they truly let us fly?" Icarus asked one evening, as the last feathers were set in place. "If the gods are kind," Daedalus replied softly. "But listen to me, my son. The sky is not ours. If you fly too low, the sea's damp breath will weigh down the wings. If you fly too high, the sun's fire will melt the wax. Keep to the middle path. Balance, that is how man survives between earth and heaven." Icarus nodded, but his heart was already somewhere far above the waves. When dawn came, they fastened the wings to their arms. Daedalus tested his first, beating them slowly until a gust lifted him from the ground. For a moment, he hung in the air, neither man nor god, but something in between. Icarus laughed aloud, his joy echoing through the stone walls. "Father, look, we are free." "Not yet," Daedalus called. "Come, follow me, but do not stray." Together they rose from the tower, the guards below staring in disbelief. The wings caught the wind, lifting them higher, carrying them out over the sea. The island fell away beneath them, and the endless blue opened like a song for Daedalus. The flight was freedom tempered by caution. For Icarus, it was something else entirely, a dream made flesh. The air rushed past his face, cool and wild, the wind whistling through the feathers like laughter. The world stretched endlessly in every direction, the clouds gleaming like gates of heaven. He forgot the warnings. He forgot the weight of the wings, the wax, the wind. He only knew the thrill of rising. "Father," he cried out, "look how high I can go." Daedalus turned sharply, fear striking his heart. Icarus, not so high, not toward the sun. But his voice was lost in the roar of the wind. Icarus soared upward, higher and higher, the air thinning around him. The sunlight burned brighter, fierce and golden, painting his wings with flame. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw the gods themselves, Apollo in his chariot, the sun blazing behind him. He reached toward the light. Then the wax began to melt. At first, he felt only warmth, then wetness as the feathers loosened, scattering like snow. The wings broke apart, drifting downward in a shimmer of white. "Father," he called, but the word was snatched by the wind. Daedalus turned in time to see him fall. The boy tumbled through the air, arms flailing, eyes wide with terror and wonder. The sea rose up to meet him, calm and cold. There was a sound not of a crash, but of silence swallowing a heartbeat. Daedalus descended, calling his name again and again, but only the waves answered. At last, he found a ring of feathers floating on the surface, gleaming faintly in the morning sun. He gathered them in his hands, his tears falling into the sea. That place, the sailors say, was named Icaria, in memory of the boy who flew too high. Daedalus flew on, weary and broken, until he reached the shores of Sicily. There he built a temple to Apollo and hung his wings upon the wall, never to fly again. In time, people forgot the tower, the flight, and even the labyrinth. But the story of Icarus remained, whispered by waves, painted on walls, sung by poets. It was not a tale of failure, as some believe, but of the price of desire. For Icarus did not fall because he was foolish. He fell because he dared to reach. And so, when you close your eyes tonight and drift into dreams, think of him, the boy who touched the edge of heaven and left behind only feathers. Somewhere, perhaps, the gods still remember him, and the sun still shines a little warmer where he fell. The sea murmurs softly beneath your thoughts. The wind hums a lullaby older than time. Sleep comes like wings unfolding. The flight continues gently, endlessly, in the quiet of your dreams. In the stillness before dawn, when even the gods themselves seemed to sleep, there was a faint sound that never ceased, the whisper of threads being drawn through the loom of eternity. It was said that beyond the sight of both mortals and immortals, in a place where time curved back upon itself, 3 ancient sisters worked endlessly. Their names were Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, the Moirai, the Fates. They were older than Zeus, older than Olympus, older even than chaos itself. When the universe was young and the stars were still learning to shine, they had already taken their places beside the great loom, spinning the story of everything that was and would ever be. The youngest, with hands soft as twilight, spun the thread of life from a distaff of silver. From her fingers flowed every soul that would ever breathe, kings and beggars, heroes and wanderers, each strand shining briefly before vanishing into the weave. Her eyes were calm, her smile faint, as if she knew that every beginning carried its own ending within it. Beside her sat Lachesis, the middle sister, whose eyes held the color of faded parchment. She measured each thread carefully, stretching it across her lap, deciding how long it would endure. She did not speak often, but when she did, her voice carried the weight of ages. "This one shall burn bright but brief," she would murmur. "This one shall linger, quiet and steady." And then there was Atropos, the eldest, veiled and silent. Her shears glinted coldly in the dim light, sharper than any blade forged by God or man. When the time came, she would lift them without hesitation and cut the thread, no sooner, no later. The moment her blade touched the strand, the life it held flickered out, and a new silence settled upon the loom together. The sisters wove the vast tapestry of fate, an endless fabric stretching across the cosmos. In its threads shimmered every heartbeat, every storm, every whisper of love or war. The stars themselves were said to tremble when the Moirai paused, for even gods feared their design. One night, as the loom hummed softly, Clotho glanced up at her sisters. "Tell me," she said gently, "do you ever tire of this work? Of spinning, measuring, cutting, always the same?" Lachesis smiled faintly. "It is not our place to tire. The river does not weary of flowing." Atropos said nothing, but her hands tightened on her shears. The faint snip echoed through the chamber. "But what of choice?" Clotho asked. "Do they truly have none?" Lachesis lifted a thread and held it toward her. Within its weave shimmered 1,000 moments: laughter, sorrow, triumph, fear. "Choice lives inside the thread," she said, "but the thread itself, that is ours." It was not often that the fates spoke of such things. Their work was constant, and silence was its truest companion. Yet, sometimes, between one breath and the next, they paused to gaze at what they had created. There were threads that glowed with fierce light, those of heroes who defied gods and monsters alike. Others were dim, fragile, flickering like dying embers. But together they formed something greater, a tapestry so vast that even the gods could not see its edges. Far above Olympus, Zeus himself would sometimes send his gaze toward the Fates' realm. Though king of the heavens, he did not command them, for even his thunder could not break the threads they wove. When a mortal died, Zeus might mourn or rage, but never interfere. The sisters' work was law, the only law the gods obeyed. It was said that once Apollo came to them, pleading for the life of a young poet he had loved. "He is too young," the god said. "His voice has only begun to sing." Atropos did not look up. "The song is finished." "Then let me add one verse," Apollo begged. The shears gleamed. "No verse can be sung twice," she replied. And with that, she cut the thread. Apollo's tears fell upon the loom, and where they landed, tiny stars appeared glowing softly. Eternal. In another age, a mortal woman named Althea came, her heart heavy with grief. Her son's thread had burned brightly, too brightly. She knelt before the fates, her voice trembling. "Spare him," she pleaded. "He is my only child." Clotho's eyes softened, but Lachesis shook her head. "The weave must remain balanced." Althea reached for the shears herself, her fingers trembling. "Then take mine instead." Atropos paused, the only time she ever had. For though her duty was fixed, the courage of mortal love could still stir her. She set down the shears and whispered, "As you wish." The threads shifted. The boy's strand brightened, Althea's dimmed. And when dawn came, her son woke with tears on his cheeks, not knowing whose they were. The loom hummed on. Ages passed. Empires rose and crumbled. The stars themselves moved like dust across the black. And still the fates worked, tireless and unseen. They were not cruel, though mortals often thought them so. They did not take pleasure in endings. To them, every life, short or long, sorrowful or sweet, was a single note in a melody too vast for any ear to hear. Sometimes, when the sisters grew quiet, they would listen to the sound of that melody echoing through the halls of time. It was soft and distant, like wind over water. "This is the song of life," Clotho would murmur, "and every note returns, one day, to silence." Atropos would lift her shears, and another thread would fall. Lachesis would tie the loose end to another, weaving the old into the new. And thus the pattern continued, seamless, eternal, and yet somewhere deep within that infinite design, there was a thread unlike any other. It shimmered faintly, not with gold or silver, but with light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The sisters watched it sometimes, but did not speak of it. It was said that this was the thread of hope, spun from the last glimmer that escaped Pandora's box, carried across the ages by unseen hands. Hope, they knew, was not something they had spun. It was something mankind had woven for itself, and even the fates could not cut it. When the last star fades and the final thread is drawn, they say the sisters will rest at last. The loom will fall silent, and the tapestry will unfurl, revealing the story of all that was. In its folds will lie every soul, every dream, every breath. Until then, the whisper continues. The threads shimmer in endless motion. And if you listen closely, in the stillness before sleep, you may hear it too, the quiet rhythm of fate being woven, steady as a heartbeat, soft as the turning of time. So close your eyes, traveler. Let the loom hum around you. Your thread is safe for now, glowing faintly in the hands of eternity. Sleep comes gently, like silk drawn through the fingers of the gods. There came a time, long after the songs of heroes had faded and the altars had grown cold, when even the gods began to grow weary. The temples that once echoed with hymns and prayers now stood quiet, their marble cracked, their fires dim. Mortals no longer looked to the heavens for guidance. Their faith had turned to stone, to reason, to the simple labor of living. And so, upon Mount Olympus, where laughter once rolled like thunder and ambrosia, flowed like rivers of light, a strange stillness fell. The gods, who had once ruled with lightning and pride, began to drift into dreams. One by one, their voices dimmed, their hearts slowed, their golden halls gathered dust. It was said that Zeus himself was the first to feel it, that soft pull toward slumber. He stood upon the balcony of his palace, gazing down at the mortal world below. Cities gleamed like fireflies, their lights bright but distant. "They no longer need us," he murmured, his thunderous voice reduced to a sigh. Beside him stood Hera, regal even in silence. "They never did," she said, her eyes reflecting the flicker of mortal fires. "They only feared us." Zeus turned, a faint smile ghosting across his face. "Fear kept them faithful. And now?" Hera asked. "Now they dream their own dreams," he replied. The wind whispered through the olive trees, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter, the laughter of humans living unbound by divine will. The sound stirred something deep in Zeus's chest, something like sorrow, or perhaps envy. He had ruled for eons, commanding storms and shaping destinies. Yet this mortal joy, fragile, fleeting, utterly free, seemed a power greater than his own that night. As the stars wheeled silently above, Zeus closed his eyes and did not open them again. His throne stood empty, his scepter cold. The king of gods had fallen into the first sleep. One by one, the others followed. Ares, god of war, tried to resist. For a while, he wandered the mortal battlefields, invisible to men, his armor still gleaming, his eyes still burning with fire. But war had changed. No longer fought for glory or honor, it had become something crueler, machines and smoke, chaos without courage. He found no poetry in it, no valor, no song, only the endless sound of weeping. And so, he too laid down his spear beside the ruins of Troy, where wildflowers grew among the stones. "Let them fight without me," he said, and his voice was soft for the first time in eternity. When the dawn rose, he was gone, and the wind carried his name into the mountains. Aphrodite lingered longer. Love, after all, is stubborn. She drifted through cities and villages, her unseen hand brushing against hearts, kindling small flames of affection in lonely souls. But even she began to fade, for mortal love no longer needed gods to guide it. People found their own ways to love, imperfect, painful, beautiful. They built lives, broke hearts, began again. It was love, born of choice, not divine whim. Watching them, Aphrodite smiled. "They have learned well," she whispered. She walked into the sea from which she had been born, her form dissolving into foam and starlight. Only the scent of roses lingered in the air. Athena. She sat in the shadow of the Parthenon, her owl perched on her shoulder, and looked out over the mortal world. She saw their progress, their machines, their libraries, their endless curiosity. "They build what we once imagined," she said softly. "They have taken our stories and made them their own." Her owl blinked slowly. "They no longer pray to me," Athena continued, "but they seek knowledge. That is enough." And so she stood, brushed the dust from her cloak, and looked to the horizon, where dawn was rising, bright, golden, indifferent. "Perhaps," she said, "this is how the gods dream." Then she walked into the light, and where she stepped, olive trees bloomed once more. Hermes was the last to fall asleep. Ever restless, ever curious, he wandered between the realms, from the ruins of Olympus to the quiet valleys of Hades. He visited every god in their slumber. He found Poseidon deep beneath the waves, his trident resting beside him, his dreams full of coral palaces and tides that never turned. He found Artemis sleeping among silver stags in a forest where the moon never waned. He found Hestia curled beside the embers of an eternal hearth, the last fire still burning softly in her care. When Hermes finally returned to Olympus, he stood before the empty thrones and laughed softly. "The world turns without us," he said, "but perhaps it always did." He set his caduceus down, its golden wings folding for the first time. "Maybe it's time we let them dream their own myths." He lay down where the wind was warmest, on the marble steps that once echoed with divine footsteps, and closed his eyes. And thus Olympus slept. Centuries passed. The mountains grew quiet. Snow covered the once golden halls. Vines crept over marble columns. Birds nested in Hera's throne. The sound of mortal prayers faded into silence, replaced by the hum of the earth itself. And in that silence, the gods dreamed. They dreamed not of wars or temples, but of the world below, of laughter, music, love, loss. They dreamed of everything they had once ruled, now living freely. In their dreams, they walked among mortals again, not as gods, but as companions. They ate, they wept, they aged. They lived the lives they had once shaped from afar. And in that dreaming, they found peace. It was said that if you climbed Mount Olympus now, you would find nothing but stone and sky. Yet on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the air is still, a faint light sometimes glimmers among the peaks. Some say it's lightning, a remnant of Zeus's power. Others say it's just the wind catching the snow. But those who have seen it and listened closely swear they hear something else, a low, rhythmic sound, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. The old storytellers call it the breath of the gods. They say it's the sound of Olympus dreaming, dreaming of the world that once worshipped it, and the mortals who, in their brief and beautiful lives, had finally learned to live without gods. And perhaps, somewhere in that endless slumber, Zeus smiles. It began with a rumor, as most ancient wonders do. Travelers crossing the mountains of Thessaly, of thunder without storm, and of melodies that rose and faded with the wind. They said that sometimes, if you camped near the peaks of Olympus and stayed awake long enough, you could hear a faint voice calling not in Greek, not in any tongue of men, but in something older, deeper, a language that stirred the soul rather than the ear. Few believed these tales. The age of myths was gone. The world had moved forward, dragging its faith into the modern sun. Yet even the most rational mind finds room for curiosity when night grows quiet and the stars seem too close. And so, it was a young scholar named Theon who decided to climb Olympus, not in worship, but in search of proof. Theon was no poet. His hands were calloused from digging among ruins, his heart tempered by disappointment. For years, he had studied the myths of Greece gods and monsters, heroes and tragedies, but to him they were only echoes of human imagination. Myth, he often said to his students, is how the ancients explained what they could not understand. Yet somewhere inside him, perhaps in the same place where childhood dreams hide, there still flickered a tiny light of wonder. When he set out from his village, dawn had barely touched the horizon. The mountain loomed ahead like a sleeping god itself, massive, eternal, and utterly indifferent. The path was overgrown, the air sharp with pine and frost. Birds sang somewhere above him, but their voices were small against the silence. Each step seemed to carry him backward through time. By noon, clouds had gathered. The climb grew steep. Theon's breath came in small clouds of mist, and his thoughts drifted strangely. He imagined the old story Zeus hurling lightning from the summit, Hera's jealousy, Poseidon's storms breaking upon mortal shores. He smiled faintly. Old tales, he murmured, though his voice trembled. That night, he made camp near the upper slopes. The air was thin, the stars piercing. He built a small fire and opened his notebook, intending to write, but his pen hovered uselessly above the page. There was something in the air of vibration, subtle yet constant, like the low hum of the earth itself. It seemed to pulse beneath his heartbeat, and then he heard it, a sound distant but clear, not the wind, not thunder, something softer like breathing. He froze. The sound grew steady and rhythmic, filling the night with quiet life. He stood, heart hammering, and turned toward the summit. The stars above the peak seemed to shimmer brighter, as though stirred by some hidden force. The breath of the gods, he whispered. The old legend, once dismissed, now felt frighteningly alive. Sleep came to him in fragments, heavy and strange. In his dreams, he saw figures of light walking through clouds, faces half remembered from ancient statues. A woman with eyes like the moon smiled at him and said, "You have come too late, child of dust. We are dreaming now." He woke before dawn, cold and shaking. His fire had died, but the air around him shimmered faintly, as though lit from within. The hum was stronger now, pulling him upward. By midday, he reached the summit. What he found there should have been impossible. The ruins of Olympus lay before him, but not as the ancients described them. There were no gleaming palaces, no thrones of gold. Instead, vast marble fragments lay half-buried in snow and moss columns, taller than ships, statues worn smooth by wind and time. Yet, despite their decay, they seemed alive. He placed his hand upon one of the broken stones. It was warm as he moved deeper into the ruins. He began to see shapes carved into the mountain itself, forms too large to be human. A hand of marble, fingers curled as if in sleep. A face half buried in the rock, serene and beautiful, and everywhere, that sound. The breathing, deep, slow, endless. Theon's knees weakened. His rational mind screamed to turn back, but awe pinned him in place. He realized then that Olympus was not abandoned it. The mountain itself was dreaming, holding within it the sleeping remnants of the divine. He stumbled upon an archway, its keystone carved with ancient runes. Beneath it lay a faintly glowing passage. Every instinct told him to flee, yet his curiosity burned brighter than fear. He entered. The tunnel spiraled downward, its walls lined with crystal veins that pulsed with golden light. The sound grew louder, closer. His breath matched its rhythm unconsciously. Time seemed to dissolve. He could no longer tell whether he was climbing or falling. At last, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern, and there, bathed in a soft, golden glow, lay the gods. They were not statues. They were not ghosts. They were vast, luminous forms, half flesh, half stone. Zeus reclined upon a fractured throne, his hands resting upon his knees. His eyes were closed, but sparks of lightning flickered beneath the lids. Hera lay beside him, her fingers entwined with his. Ares lay curled near the base of the throne, his armor dulled, his sword turned to dust. Aphrodite floated above a pool of light, her form rippling like water. Athena rested beneath an olive tree that glowed without flame. Theon fell to his knees. He wanted to speak, to call out, but his voice vanished in the hum of their dreaming. He realized with horror and awe that every breath of the mountain was theirs, the gods themselves still breathing, still alive, though the world had forgotten them. He felt something stir in the era presence, vast and gentle. It spoke not in words, but in feeling, a voice like wind over marble dot. Why have you come? Theon's thoughts formed without sound, to learn if you were real, and now that you know, he hesitated. I don't know. Then perhaps you are wiser than most. The presence shifted, like the turning of a tide. The world does not need us, but it remembers, and memory is enough. Theon felt warmth spread through him, a deep peace that silenced all doubt. He looked up at the sleeping faces and realized something profound. Faith was not about belief or worship. It was about memory, about carrying the old light forward, even when the flame had gone out. He stayed in the cavern until nightfall, writing nothing, speaking nothing. When he finally left, he carried no proof, no artifact, no photograph, no stone, only silence. When he descended the mountain, he found the world unchanged. Villages still bustled, children still laughed, the sun still rose. Yet everything seemed sharper, truer. The wind smelled of eternity. He never spoke of what he had seen, but sometimes, on quiet nights, he would sit by his window and look toward the mountain. And though his eyes could not see it, he knew that somewhere beneath the snow and rock, the gods still dreamed, and, perhaps, in their dreams, they dreamed of him too. And so Olympus slept, not forgotten, but remembered in whispers. The gods had become part of the mountain's heart, their dreams flowing into rivers, into trees, into every breath of mortal life. They were not gone. They had simply changed shape like myths always do. The centuries moved like shadows. The mountains endured, and so did the silence. Olympus slept beneath snow and stone, its golden heart beating faintly, like the memory of thunder long after the storm. Below, the world kept turning. Empires rose and fell, machines replaced myths, and humanity grew louder in its disbelief. The gods no longer appeared in dreams. Their names became symbols in books, metaphors in poems, dust in libraries. Yet still, deep beneath the mountain, they dreamed. At first, their dreams were bright. They dreamed of the old world, the laughter of mortals, offering honey and wine, the music of flutes by temple fires, the smell of olive oil burning in bronze lamps. They dreamed of the sea glittering with Poseidon's trident, of Athena's owl gliding through silver air, of Apollo's lyre weaving dawn into melody. In their dreams, the world was still singing their names, but dreams, like all things, began to fade. As centuries turned to millennia, mortal prayers grew faint. The air above Olympus filled not with hymns, but with the whir of airplanes, the hum of satellites. The stars that once guided sailors were now catalogued, numbered, understood. Humans no longer sought gods in the heavens. They sought themselves. And so, the dreams of Olympus changed. Zeus, in his sleep, dreamed of lightning that no longer answered his command. He saw cities of glass and iron where humans walked without fear of the sky. He dreamed of storms born from engines, thunder shaped by science. His power had become their invention, and he did not know whether to be proud or sorrowful. Hera dreamed of love that no longer needed her blessing. She saw mortals binding their lives by choice, not decry love without prayer, marriage without gods. She dreamed of brides who walked down aisles beneath electric lights instead of sunlight, holding flowers that no temple had seen. She smiled in her slumber, for though she was forgotten, the spirit of her domain endured. Ares dreamed of wars that no song could sanctify. He dreamed of machines devouring armies, of silent weapons and invisible battles fought on screens. There was no honor in these wars, no hymns for courage. He turned in his sleep, his armor rusted, his spear dissolved. "Let them fight without glory," he murmured in his dream. "Perhaps they will one day tire of it." Aphrodite dreamed of a world that had rewritten her name. She saw love multiplied through invisible wires, faces meeting through glass screens, hearts connecting across continents. Love had become infinite, but also fleeting. She dreamed of tenderness and loneliness intertwined, and though her heart ached, she also felt wonder. "They love as we once did," she whispered, "only faster." Athena dreamed of minds that reached beyond Olympus. She saw mortals splitting atoms, mapping stars, creating machines that could think. Knowledge had outgrown its teacher. Yet even in her deep sleep, she smiled. "They seek," she murmured, "and that is enough." Hades dreamed of silence. His realm, once vast and shadowed, now lay empty. Souls no longer came to him in worship. They came in data, in code, in memory. He watched as humans preserved their dead not through ritual but through remembrance, photographs, words, digital echoes. Even in death, he thought in his dream, they build their own underworld. And thus the gods dreamed on, each one fading a little more with every century. Their forms grew dim, their divine essence blending with the earth. The mountain itself became their body, its rivers their veins, its thunder their pulse. They were no longer beings of form and power, but essence, memory, myth. Then, one night, something strange happened far below. In a small town nestled in the foothills of Olympus, a child was born during a thunderstorm. Her mother named her Lydia, after her grandmother, unaware that the name once belonged to an ancient land favored by gods. The lightning that split the sky that night struck no tree, no tower. It struck the mountain itself, awakening a faint tremor beneath the earth. The child grew ordinary yet curious. She loved stories. Every night she would ask her grandmother to tell her old myths before bed of heroes, monsters, and gods who once ruled the heavens. The old woman's voice was soft and trembling, the words half forgotten, but Lydia listened as if each one were a spell. "Do you believe they were real?" she once asked. Her grandmother smiled. "Real or not, they live when you remember them." Years passed. Lydia became a scholar, much like Theon before her. She studied history, language, myth, but unlike others, she did not seek to prove or disprove the gods. She sought to understand why humans ever believed in the first place. "Perhaps," she once wrote in her notebook, "belief is not about proof, it is about connection." One summer, drawn by something she could not name, Lydia climbed Olympus. She carried no offerings, no tools, only a journal and a small lamp. The path was harder now, eroded by time, but the silence felt alive. She felt the same hum Theon had heard centuries before, though she did not know his name. At the summit, she found only ruins, broken stones, wildflowers, and sky. Yet, as night fell, the wind shifted, and she felt it, a pulse, faint but real, beneath her feet. She knelt, pressing her hand to the ground. "It was warm," she whispered, almost without thought. "Are you still there?" And for the first time in ages, the mountain answered. The wind rose, carrying a whisper, not a voice, but a feeling. It filled her heart with light, with sorrow, with endless age. She saw flashes, marble halls, divine laughter, golden clouds. For a heartbeat, she felt the gaze of Zeus, the wisdom of Athena, the beauty of Aphrodite. The gods did not speak, yet she understood. "We never left. You simply stopped listening." Tears filled her eyes. "We forgot," she whispered. The wind softened. "Then remember," she stayed until dawn, watching the sun crown the peaks. When she descended, she carried nothing but the story, the quiet certainty that the divine had not died, only changed. Years later, Lydia became a storyteller. Her voice was calm, her tone gentle. Her stories, slow tales of forgotten gods and ancient dreams, told not to teach, but to soothe. People listened before sleep, letting her words drift through them like lullabies. And, though they did not know it, every time she spoke a name, Zeus, Hera, Athena, the mountain stirred, ever so slightly. The gods, still dreaming beneath the stone, smiled in their sleep. For in the end, faith had not vanished. It had simply changed form, no longer temples or sacrifices, but stories. Myths retold in quiet voices on sleepless nights. Words that asked nothing, promised nothing, yet kept the divine alive in the gentlest way possible. The world no longer prayed, but it remembered, and in that memory, Olympus still breathed. When the wind blew through the mountain passes at night, it carried a sound, soft, rhythmic, eternal, not thunder, not song, just the echo of an ancient breath, the last dream of gods who had become part of the earth they once ruled, the last dream of Olympus